Now we're going to talk about the judicial branch. So when we say the judicial branch, we're talking about the court system. The highest court in our country is called the Supreme Court, and Congress has actually created the other courts in the federal court system. And so there are actually two systems of courts in the United States. We have the federal court system that talks about laws that apply to all of the United States. And then there are also state court systems that deal with disputes about state laws. And so what type of law depends on what type of court system depends on what type of law is in question. Okay, so if federal courts get to hear court cases that involve federal laws, or if they involve the United States Constitution, or if there's disputes between citizens that are in different states, those might go to a federal court. A state court hears laws that are about states' laws or states' constitution. So Michigan courts would get court cases that are about Michigan's laws or Michigan's constitutions. The type of things that you hear about in everyday life, like a traffic violation or a family matter, an accident, a crime that might happen, those go to the state courts. Okay. Bigger things like issues where laws might violate the Constitution go to the federal court system. Okay, there are also two types of cases, criminal cases and civil cases. If it's a criminal case, it's something related to a crime. That's the kind of trial that we normally hear about or we normally see on TV. And a civil case is usually when someone feels like their rights have been violated. Relating to the rights of citizens is a civil case. Okay, if there is a trial, the trial court is the first court to hear the case. In the federal system, the trial court is called a district court. The lawyers use evidence to try to prove their client's side of the story. Sometimes there might be a jury trial where there's a group of 12 people who listen to the evidence and decide who wins the case. The decision in the case is called a verdict. Okay, that's where it starts, but that's not always where it ends. So there is an appeals system. The courts that are above the trial courts are called appellate courts. The federal system and most state systems have two appellate level courts called a court of appeals and then a Supreme Court. So if there is a reason to disagree with an original case or original handling of a court case, then the lawyer can make an appeal to go to another court a little higher up. And they could potentially either affirm the original decision, say that it was made correctly, they could reverse the decision, or they could say, no, this really needs to go back to the trial court and start over. So we see this pattern then of how cases can travel up in the court system. So it usually starts in the trial court, then might go to the Court of Appeals, and then might go to the Supreme Court. And so in order for the Supreme Court to hear a decision on a law, that law has already had to be brought into lower courts' decisions that now the Supreme Court might have the ability to overrule. Okay, so the Supreme Court decision is the final decision, and they have the power of what we call judicial review. That means if federal courts make laws that don't follow the Constitution, that the Supreme Court has the right to get rid of those laws. Okay, they can also affirm that the laws do follow the Constitution, which is a possibility. And so the Supreme Court doesn't get to hear very many cases each year. They only hear a few because normally when they hear those cases, there's something that's really big. So the Supreme Court is the highest court in our country, and they have the highest amount of power of any other part of the judicial branch. The Supreme Court is appointed by the president, but those members serve for life. So when someone is nominated and appointed to the Supreme Court, they have to be confirmed by the Senate. And once they're there until either they die or they could resign or they could be removed from office if they commit some kind of a crime. Sometimes we see Supreme Court justices purposely resign so that a certain president can appoint their replacement. But a lot of times we see Supreme Court justices die in office. Okay, and that's the Supreme Court in a flash.